Enjoy your dance, okay?
It's the synchronous.
Very odd.
Yes, it is very odd. Can the students out in synchronous land hear me? I see Miriam, Nicholas, Habib, and Sarah.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Professor.
Okay,
Yes,
good
we
morning.
I hear you.
Excellent, thank you. Do you see me also?
Yes,
Yes.
clear.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Now, gotta remember all the.
Up to the minus sign of that one, on the meeting chat side. The meeting chat, there's like a small arrow, right? Beside, over there, on the top.
Up here?
Yeah, there's a small arrow there. You click pop out.
Okay, there. Thank you. And next. Oh, right. Is it week 7? Yeah.
Do we have a class next week? Because it's a study week.
We don't have a class next week.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. It's 10:46 according to the clock on my monitor here. I'm gonna wait a few more minutes before we get started. Are that many people in the chat? And I'm hoping more will join. So I'll just wait a minute or two. Just to let you know what the plan is. I'm gonna spend some time taking a look at the discussion board, the first discussion board. We're gonna go through some of the different ways that students produced excellent answers, and then perhaps consider some of the ways where there could be some improvement. I think there's a little bit of lack of clarity on the part of a few students. And then we're going to take a look at the work at the group literature review project. I've looked at all of the submissions, and some groups missed some bits, so we'll take a look at that. I'm not sure how long all of that will take, but I want to spend enough time so that everybody has a chance on the remaining discussion boards to contribute to the fullest of their ability and willingness to engage, and also moving forward for the group literature review work, just so that everyone has a clearer idea of where we're going. So it's 10:48. I'm going to wait 5 more minutes, and then I will I'll start then. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them up now on any particular part of what it is that we're doing. Pop quiz for 90% of your grade. What's the date today?
21.
21.
I fail.
Yep. Oh, well. Thank you.
That's how long my semester is going. I don't know what date.
Plus, I have to remember because this week is midterms week.
Yeah.
I have 3 of them to this this week.
I'm okay. I don't have like exams, like or tests, just essays, and essays. Oh. Good luck.
Thank you.
Somebody just asked in the group chat, do we have a pop quiz today? I'm sorry if you're out there, he's just joking.
Yeah. Did someone just say that?
No, and
Oh,
someone must have been.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Okay, well then, let's get started. So I knew yesterday that it was week 7. Okay, well, that looked a little different. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're going to spend some time together taking a look at some of the students' responses to the writing prompts on the discussion board. Overall, the discussion board, the mechanism I thought works well. I thought it worked well, especially with this group. For the most part, everybody put in a minimal, at least a minimally acceptable level of effort. Yeah, I would say that everyone who submitted something put in a minimally acceptable level of effort, so that everyone who submitted something got at least part grades for what they submitted. Some students, a number of students, only responded to one other student's post, and so they left marks unrealized in a sense. And so I encourage you all to pay attention to the description of what the assignment requires of you in all of the discussion boards. In addition to writing a main post, a substantial response to the prompt and to the video, I'm also looking for you to comment on each other's posting for a number of different purposes. The purposes we may discuss in a little bit to clarify, but minimally, I want you to understand. Minimally, I wonder about those students who only responded to one post, if they misunderstood or if they simply didn't even didn't even look at the instructions. Because I know one thing that happens, I don't understand how this happens. This is not how I did things when I was a student. I did lots of things wrong. I didn't do this one thing wrong. Students often tend to, again, for reasons that are a mystery to me, ask each other what the assignment is instead of asking me. I'm puzzled by this. It was a complete mystery to me until my own children went to post-secondary education, and they did the same thing. And I was stunned that they would do that, since they grew up in my house, and I was sure that that had come up in everyday conversation, the way, work stuff comes up at home. But in any event, please carefully read the instructions that you've been given in order to see what is being asked of you. For the first time, it occurred to me, looking over these discussion boards, and it's the third, maybe even the fourth time just in this course that I've used discussion boards. So it's kind of surprising to me that it took me this long to see it. But I would say within the students, there are sort of two generally distinct ways that the students have engaged in the exercise that I'm asking of you to engage in. And I would say they map on loosely, but they loosely map on to the very distinction that was one of the main points in the video, and that was the topic that attracted by far the greatest amount of response from the students. And that's the difference between a place you happen to be and a place you call home. And I would say some students engage in the work of the course so far more like it's just a place they happen to be, as opposed to a place they could call home. I mean this in a metaphorical sense, where this class, the distinction would be where you actively engage in what the subject matter of the course is. That would be the home side of it. And if you simply take a look at the minimal requirements and just try to do the least amount and engage in a purely external manner with the subject matter, that's more like, I would say, a place you happen to be. I want to discuss that distinction in more academically recognizable ways later, but it occurred to me when I read that, as I was looking over the responses, that a bunch of the students seem to have embraced more fully in the spirit in which I had hoped I generally hope students would embrace whatever course they're taking, whereas other students, they don't embrace it. It doesn't feel like they belong. And in interacting with each other's work, so that the comments on other posts, that seems to me to be the obvious place where the opportunity to do this is in a certain way most available to students. Okay, so now this long quote, which is hard to read for me, so I just want to take a look at this. So a student responded in this way. This is their longer post. And I want to just highlight. And I want to focus on one of the distinctions that's important in the video and that many students identified in an incomplete way. So taken together, it's more taken together the absence of a certain connection, intellectual, conceptual, analytic connection that I want to call to your attention. And that has to do with the conceptually complex relationship between one's subjective impression of the place one is. So a lot of people argue that a minimum condition or a sufficient, some people argued a sufficient condition for a place to be home is that you feel accepted. What was missing from most explicit, and it didn't seem to me to be particularly an implicit recognition either on the part of most students, is that that subjective impression exists in a social context that's at least constrained, if not absolutely defined, by many objective situations. And so the example I have in mind is there's a lot of older sociological research on housing and on employment opportunities for recent migrants to Canada. And in both of those fields, in housing and in employment, there's very good evidence, but that it remains the case that if the easiest way to do this research and the way that's most widely operationalized is by taking a look at attempts to enter the housing market, in particular the rental market or the labor market on paper or electronically now. So that if your name is Smith or if your name is Singh, you're going to get a different response if you apply 1,000 times for a job or if you apply 1,000 times to get an apartment. There are still, and that exists largely, that's an objective feature of the information that's available from a social scientific point of view. So anecdotally, and that's the nature of this exercise, anecdotally, some students feel like they fit in. Some of the respondents in our group feel like they fit in. Some of them felt, one of the students anyway, felt like he or she fit in immediately, as soon as they got here. They felt like they fit in better here than in the country they were born in and grew up in. Other students have been here a long time and still don't feel like they fit in. It seems unlikely to me in either case that there'd be any external kind of motivation for students to I don't see why students would construct an answer one way or the other simply to curry grades, which is always a concern. Why are people responding the way they do? What I'm trying to get you to consider is, to what extent are the responses that this particular exercise generated, how could they be taken as in some way scientific data that'll help us better understand what's going on? And I think properly handled with skepticism and care, certain provisional conclusions can be drawn from this. But the skepticism, the skeptical attitude that I'm asking you to take when asking yourself this question, are the students' responses in this exercise, is there any information in it at all? Or is it simply students trying to tell me what I want to say, or students trying to say what they need to get a good grade? Or is there something else going on in addition to that? I'm convinced that there's something going on in addition to that. And as I mentioned, I've done this course a number of times now, and I've used this discussion board with these questions and this video 3 or 4 times now. And every time, roughly speaking, it's the same thing. There are international students who have been here not very long, who say they feel absolutely welcome in Canada. And there are students who've been here, international students, who feel not welcome here. There are domestic students, that is, students who are residents, at least, of Canada, so not necessarily born here, but who are residents of here, and students who've identified as second-generation immigrants who themselves don't feel welcome in Canada. They've never lived anywhere else, but they don't feel welcome in Canada. And I'm absolutely not suggesting that that's not true or anything like that. What I'm asking you to consider is the other side of the equation. What's going on in Canada that's making, or is anything going on in Canada, in Canadian society, in a subsection of Canadian society, in some sort, I mean, these are all what the categories are that we would use to try to describe what's going on the receiving side rather than the recepting side. So not the students' feelings, but the reality in which those feelings are being generated and produced and reproduced and sometimes mitigated and transformed and so on. What's going on in society. And that side of it did not show up nearly as much in the responses as it needs to, for those of us who are trying to get an understanding of how social scientists look at these questions. The subjective component is crucial, and it's a weakness of much social science that component gets ignored. On the other hand, it's a strong, one of the strengths of the social sciences is when they're able to develop concepts that allow us to compare the reality within which these subjective impressions occur and a broader understanding of that reality. So what's going on in Canada such that some people, students, workers, migrants, moms, dads, children, and so on, when they get here, they feel welcome or they don't feel welcome. It's important to understand how they feel, and it's important from a social scientific point of view to understand how they feel. It's important, and it's important to the government to know this. The government says they care about this, and we have already looked at, and we will continue to look at, and we'll look at more reasons why the government, from a policy point of view, is invested in a certain kind of subjective response from people who move to Canada. Taking a narrow starting point from the point of view of Seneca College. Seneca College, as I've mentioned a number of times, like all the colleges in Ontario, like all of post-secondary in North America, is increasingly open to, I would say, verging on dangerously dependent on the tuition money from international students. And almost independently of how you want to characterize the nature of that relationship, given that fact, it's in the college, the college understands that we have a lot of international students, and the college says it understands that how students respond as students to the learning, to the work that they're here to do. For many, many students, maybe not for every single student, but for many, many, many students, it's easier to invest yourself in your work if you feel like you belong, if you feel like you're welcome, if you don't feel like you're a total outsider. Now, that's a longer standing problem. From a social, again, from a social scientific point of view, sociology, from at least almost its very beginning, I think that it's from even before that, but nonetheless, very early on in sociology, one of the early and still very important figures in sociology, Max Weber, a German sociologist, wrote about bureaucracy and about the increasingly pervasive role of bureaucracies in modern societies. So he had Germany in mind in particular, but he was an astonishingly hardworking scholar, and he read more than an insane amount of stuff. And so he was very familiar with he died in 19 or something like that. So it was quite a while ago, but he read French and English. He read Italian. He read a lot of languages. He was very well informed. So he wasn't just looking at Germany. He was looking at bureaucracies and the feature, the connection that I want to make that he called attention to is that it's seemingly, I think he made an airtight case. It's a necessary consequence of bureaucracies that there's a danger, there's a likelihood that the people who are interacting with the bureaucracy, either on the side of working in the bureaucracy or on the side of the clients with whom that bureaucracy is interacting, there's a danger of alienation. It works a little bit on an insider-outsider thing. And so I don't know if you've ever had this experience. It's an anecdotally widely available experience. You go into a government building where there's a bureaucracy and you need help to fill out a form, or you're trying to renew your license or something along these lines. And the person with whom you're interacting says, well, did you fill out 73FK? And you deal with this once every 3 years, so you have no idea what the number of the form is. And they have no idea, they don't remember what it's like not to know the differences among all those forms. And you have no idea what it's like to know all those forms by heart. That breakdown between the interaction is built in. Weber argued, many sociologists agree. This is certainly my experience, and lots of people have had this experience. There's a breakdown. Doesn't feel like the questions they ask have a Tony Guillem shape when they're asking them, right? It feels off a little bit. And that's true even of people like me who have lived here almost all my life. I lived in France for a year, but I lived here almost all my life. I'm as middle of the road in every dimension. Nobody's picking on me. I'm practically invisible. I have a PhD, so and still I feel alienated from the process. Alienation from institutions is a feature of institutions. It's not just about migrants. It's not just about this category or that category. But is there an added level of alienation that's identifiable for certain categories of people who are interacting with that institution? Certainly. But it's worth noting that there's a background reality of alienation. Plenty of people, the high school I went to 100 years ago, was in a suburb of Montreal. Very, very, very ethnically homogenous. But there were still kids who felt like losers, and there were still kids who felt like outsiders, insider, outsider. It's one of the ways that large institutions operate. And so there's this background reality against which our experiences occur. Okay, so I highlighted the sentence. I want to read the sentence and tease out a little bit what's going on here. To me, ease is having the ability to feel secure and able to fit into Canadian society and culture. Let me just make sure. To fit into Canadian society and culture and be viewed as a Canadian rather than a minority. Then I can confidently say Canada provides me with a sense of belonging because I see myself fitting into the Canadian culture due to the factors of having attended school and college here and having the ability to see myself contributing back to the country. Both of those claims, I think, are relevant points that were some version of which were raised in the film. I think that I know anecdotally, based on having read the responses of a number of students in this class and in previous versions, lots of students feel that way. It's the connection between those two, and even the appreciation that those are at least two different sides of the same coin. It's not the same thing, but the way it reads is it moves with almost seamlessly from one to the other. And so one of the points that I want to call to your attention, overall, you've done well. I'm sure this student got it. I hope anyway that this student got a very good mark. If you didn't, let me know and I'll fix that. This is a perfectly good response. But what I want to call to your attention, I want to have you reflect a little bit on, first of all, just how hard it is to write, how hard it is to explain complicated things. Period. It's just hard to do that. It's hard to explain complicated things, especially when part of those things are personal things and part of those things are out there in the world. To articulate those two in an intelligible way is a difficult thing, and it requires effort. It requires rereading the work that you submit. I was very pleased. It seems to me that the cohort, the INS 400 this semester, the students have put either that their baseline writing ability is just quite a bit higher than earlier cohorts. That seems kind of unlikely to me. More likely, it seems to me that students took a little bit more care than they have in previous cohorts. And so maybe there's more of you who are further along in your programs, or whatever the case, whatever the reason. Overall, you did quite well submitting work that is not, where you didn't write the letter U instead of Y-O-U. That's, I gather, I suppose, completely acceptable in a number of contexts. This isn't one of those contexts. It's not about it hurting my feelings. It's not about me thinking one way or the other. It's you recognizing the communicative, the nature of the communicative work that you're doing, the exercise that you're undertaking. This is a social science course, and you're not chatting with your friends, you're producing and reproducing knowledge in a social scientific context. And I want to call that to your attention because the college's understanding is that the value of this credential, either the INS credential that this course is a home credit from, or any of the other bachelor's degrees, and perhaps to an even greater degree in the other degree programs that the students are in who are taking this course. Almost all fields, almost all work areas have their own writing conventions, their own communicating conventions. And one of the challenges that you face when you enter into a new area, or even when you move levels within the same area, is to learn the conventions that characterize the communication that's supposed to go on in that. You have to learn how to properly address your superiors. That's changed over time, and that change has manifested itself in student-professor interactions. I have asked, I don't even remember if I went through my song and dance, but I want people to call me Tony, but I have colleagues who don't want their students to refer to them by their first names. And so you need to figure that out. In the world of work, those kinds of errors can be problematic. If you fail to understand how you're expected to address your coworkers, or how you're expected to address your hierarchical superiors, that can have a negative impact on your career. And it'll do so unnecessarily. The clues are there, and what you need to do is learn how to recover those clues and to amend your behavior. What makes it difficult is it's a permanent feature, but on this specific topic, times are changing. And so on the news, when you hear powerful people, they now refer to each other by their first names in ways that is new. And so I was looking yesterday for an example, and of course it didn't come up, but sometimes the Prime Minister of Canada will refer to another world leader by their first name. Under some contexts, that would never have happened 25 years ago. And so that there's a blurring of the lines between formal and informal modes of address. It's an ongoing thing. So an example that comes up among my colleagues is some of my colleagues, at least amongst ourselves, they'll get worked up when a student will send an email to a professor and just, it starts with, hey, H-E-Y, and then launches into some an email that's obviously written informally. I think that it's almost impossible that the student is on purpose messing with the professor. I think it's my colleagues who are too uptight, but I don't think that there's any advantage from a student point of view in assuming familiarity as opposed to assuming a formal distance. It's easier to work back from that. And the context here is I want you in this exercise to try to emulate the kind of writing that you see in the assignment, in the reading assignments I've given you, and the kind of writing that you found in the works, in the articles that you looked up in and are beginning to read and analyze for the purpose of the works, the group literature review. Okay, so now, what's the next one? So here, this example, all I wanted to call to your attention is that, and this post is written at a absolutely acceptable high level, but it includes this logical peculiarity, not even peculiarity is too strong. That gap between those two claims, on the one hand, is an important component that, if depending on how quickly I get through the work stuff, the next presentation I have, substantive presentation, will deal with this kind of dynamic. But from a writing point of view, I want you to, I want to encourage all of you to carefully reread your own work, because it doesn't always say what you think it says. Or we don't always read what you think you've written. Sometimes it's very obvious, and when the student or writer themselves revisits what they've written, they realize immediately that it's not what they meant. Other times, it's more complicated. Okay, so now. Okay, I'm just gonna move on. So here's an excellent brief comment. One of the areas that I'm getting a better understanding of from having seen now multiple years of this is there's a fairly, comments don't need to be super long, and there's one sort of comment that I get over and over and over that doesn't really do what I want. Great post, Bob. I really like the way you said blah, blah, blah. I think so too. Keep up the good work. I get why you would do that. Other students are doing this. That's not what I want. That's not what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. So the student said, started out, great post, whoever. It's not that I want you to be mean to each other or anything like this. I think there is value. I do want this to be in part a conversation. And in order for conversations, human conversations anyway, almost always operate with some component of information exchange, but also a component of attention and status management and sort of non-informational mechanisms that are geared towards ensuring that the conversation part itself is carrying on. So starting out with great post, being polite, forms of address, all of these mechanisms, to the extent that they've been accurately reproduced, are part of how conversations occur. So now, back to, okay, so I'll just read it out, and I want to call to attention a couple of particular features. While I agree with you, and then there was this tiny little typo, oh well, no big deal. Something you can catch though, right? And something that downstream from here in your professional lives, I don't know if you've all heard this. I wonder if it's even a thing anymore, but I remember when I was your age, we were told over and over and over, what I think is to some degree mythological, but what we were told over and over and over is that if there's even one spelling mistake in your resume, the resume goes in the garbage. I'm skeptical about those kinds of absolute blanket statements, but on the other hand, it's so easy, especially now with word processing capabilities, to have this not happen. If you type this in Word, a little red line will go underneath it, and the machine practically makes it hard for you to not submit this stuff. And so no grades were lost here. This remains a very, very good post, but these little typos are things that that make it easy, so just there's value in it for you to commit yourself to a certain kind of excellence, a certain kind of quality in the work, in the written work that you produce, that is a skill that you can work on. So while I agree with you that memories play a major role in what you consider home for you, I said so myself in my discussion post, I also think that they don't encompass everything required to make someone feel at home. This is exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for, right? The agreeing part, and I don't even remember actually which student it is who wrote this, and I don't know any of your work anyway, so it's not as though I have a history with this student. So I don't know if this student is already very well informed about rhetoric, or if they're just a good writer separately from any kind of formal knowledge of this. But here there are a couple of rhetorical strategies that that have been implemented that make this do both of those things. This student is moving the conversation forward and adding to the conversation. So while I agree with you that memories are important, there's something else too. The student is adding something to to this thread. I don't think they encompass everything required to make someone feel at home. I think that you let go of the power to make new memories if you are still holding on the old ones, and that those moments are too small compared to the rest of our lives. I think memories bring a sense of familiarity to an individual with respect to that place, and therefore familiarity creates a sense of homeliness. Homeliness is probably not the right word in this context, but nonetheless, an excellent post. You identified a claim and you're qualifying that claim. So it's a conversation that meets the narrower or the more functionally focused kind of information exchange that's characteristic of social science writing in general. You're positioning your comment against a comment that's already been raised. So this is the kind of thing, the exact kind of thing I'm looking for in a response. So what's so great here? I also came somehow. Another excellent post. It's excellent, but it's excellent in a slightly different way. I agree with you when you talk about emptying your mind of your own inhibitions and insecurities to at least try and step out into a new and different world. It would be harder for anyone to remain closed off in a totally new environment. And by at least attempting to interact with members of a predefined community or communal setting, they can have a higher chance to interact with new people who may have similar stories or have similar circumstances. By being proactive in our communications to the people around us, we increase our chances of finding like-minded individuals, which would in turn help us to form bonds which appeal to our sense of belonging in a new and foreign place. And by being closed off, we only do ourselves a disservice. I really like to read your comparison to A Sense of Belonging and the Avatar movie, as it made me think of the issue in a new light. Great work. I've never seen, and I'm pretty sure I never will see, Avatar, so I don't know how to evaluate that part of it. But let me just make sure. So what this post does is it contributes to the ongoing conversation, not simply by agreeing with someone and leaving it at that. The poster, the person who wrote this post, restated, I thought, in a very informed and informative way. And that's in part, conversations work that way. So if you're having a conversation with a group of people, often part of the conversation will go something like this. So what you mean is that we shouldn't go to the vegetarian restaurant. You'd rather go to something like this. And taken too far, that can be a problem, but this is absolutely not taken too far. So it's part of the conversation, but it's also part of the way social scientific knowledge is transmitted, expanded, produced, reproduced, often by restating a conclusion in slightly different terms. One writer will allow his or her or their readers to be able to make connections that weren't immediately obvious in the first formulation. You restate that conclusion using slightly different terms, and that can allow readers to then connect more broadly the content of that conclusion to other kinds of considerations. Okay, so. Okay, so as I was going through this, as I was looking at the post, I made notes. So a tiny point about accuracy and writing here. So in the film, Sense of Belonging, the chief rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, mentioned that he felt at home in England because he speaks the language, loves Shakespeare, and he went to school there. I don't agree with this statement because when considering my own experience or imagining putting myself in that environment, I won't feel at home. So two things, one very tiny, the other sort of just regular tiny. First, mentioned, right? These are little things. In our context, nobody's losing any grades at all from me for making one little mistake like that. On the other hand, I do want you to develop a commitment to and on the one hand, awareness of what it is you're writing, and it's a component of taking yourself seriously as, in this case, a student in this course, that you're going to submit work that respects the rest of us by you demonstrate your respect for the rest of us by taking the care to carefully edit your own work. Now, again, my feelings aren't hurt. I'm sure none of your feelings are hurt or anything along those lines, but it's a question of professionalism. And when you go to apply for a job, one of the things that everybody says about themselves to their potential employers, and one of the things that all the employers say to potential employees is that you want this job, you want to be a professional here, we want to find a worker, we want you to be a professional. And so part of that, some of that is about little things, and you might as well just get used to that reality. Okay, then so first of all, it's not what the student says is I don't agree with his statement. Now, his almost necessarily has to refer to Jonathan Sachs here, and what Jonathan Sachs's claim that the student is saying he doesn't disagree with is about Jonathan Sachs's own feelings. Now, maybe Jonathan Sachs was lying in the movie, but that doesn't seem especially likely. I don't think that's what the student meant. I think the student didn't mean that he didn't agree with Jonathan Sachs's feelings. He disagreed with the conclusion Sachs drew from the fact of those feelings. And I think that is an important, that's a potentially, that's something to think about. And I'm inclined to agree with those of you who felt that Sachs overstated to some degree. I mean, he's so central, he's in many ways in an elite position, and it's much easier to fit in anywhere in any given society if you're fitting into the elite of that society. But be that as it may, what the student literally wrote doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense to disagree. So if someone says, I don't like blueberry pie, how do you disagree with someone when they say they like or don't like blueberry pie? You don't believe them? You think they're lying to you? I guess that's possible, but I don't think that he meant that. He disagreed with the conclusion or the argument. Okay, so. And here the stakes are a little bit different. The potential stakes increase. The difference between mentioned and mentioned, lots of people wouldn't even have noticed that. If you're scrolling through looking for a post to comment on, you get most of what you need from a quick glance, and you might not even see the M there instead of an N. But the next claim, that kind of mistake, on the basis of that, how you would test the accuracy of that claim, you need to, the stakes are marginally higher here. And so that's the main point I want to raise on that. Okay, so are there any questions? So that's the last point I wanted to take a look at for the discussion boards. And the next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the works cited assignment. But it's been nearly an hour, so I'm going to take a quick break and I'll start up again in 10 minutes or so. So I'm actually going to go. Now, yes, I'm going to go get a coffee. I need a coffee. So I'll be back in a moment. So out there, I'm going to step away for a few minutes, and so I'll be back in approximately 10 minutes. And we'll spend some time looking at the works cited assignment. And then depending on how much time is left, we'll see what we do. Okay.
sir.
Oh, hi.
Sorry, I stole these markers from the room a little earlier on today. We needed them for our class.
Hoping it worked out.
Yeah, thank you. Just return them.
But that's a lot of caffeine you got there. How much coffee do you drink on a regular, honey?
5 or 6 cups a day.
Oh my god. Gonna destroy yourself. When my anxiety disorder was like a little bit better, I could have like 2 cups a day. I can't even have one like proper cup of coffee. Like, it has to be very watered down.
What do you drink?
A latte, which is a lot of like water in it, basically, because I don't drink
How can you have a latte with no milk?
almond milk. It's water, basically. Right?
What's that?
Almond milk.
Oh, almond milk,
Which
okay,
is
right,
water. Like,
right.
it's not-
They still call it a latte? I guess the milk word is latte, but.
I mean, yeah, but like I had to cut dairy completely out of my diet, so. But I miss ice cream.
So you're lactose intolerant?
Pretty severely too, and it's kind of odd to be 23 and very like. We think it's genetic, my dad is worse than me. I could be one of those people that just drink black coffee with black coffee, they're like, no, I can't do that.
I drink black coffee.
And what is wrong with you? I don't mean that offensively, just like socially, what's wrong with you?
Like how big is the cup of black coffee?
That's also.
If it's a tiny cup like an espresso cup, then that should be okay.
Depends how much somebody's drinking on the regular, other than 5 to 6, like it could be the smallest little that you've seen. before.
Yeah. I didn't know cold brews had that much
That's
caffeine.
a lot though. It's. I'm gonna look it up, actually.
I just enjoy it because like it tastes really great.
I like the Swedish stuff from Starbucks, but
I don't like sweet things at
No?
all.
Okay, so now I'm set.
It's not even the number, it is. A lot.
I think it's 16 ounces and 250 milligrams of caffeine. This is a 16-ounce cup. Yeah.
So I'll wait 3 more minutes.
Okay, the grande has 280 milligrams, and this is the venti, so that's a lot more.
It's a lot, like, even if you put like a lot of melted it or?
I saw her, like, I usually just order cold brew, so she put like the mix of cold brew until this
I'm
much.
gonna be on the floor when I have that. Or if I have like as much as Tommy does, like absolutely not, I will be on the floor and not in a good way.
Iced coffee is a little too weak for me, so that's why I take cold brew.
Yeah, that's why I drink. But I think it's actually better that I don't drink as much now, because I don't wanna depend on it later in life.
Oh,
I already like one like watered down cup a day is not the worst thing for me. Is it bad? Sure. Like, is it awful?
well, I mean, if you're able to manage, because I drink this 1 cup, like maybe I drink 2 cups of this like for the whole week.
That's not
So
bad.
that's not that bad, so that's how I manage it, like even though I drink a lot of it now, it's
But
just
like,
spread
I
out
also,
through the
I don't
week.
really drink soda, I don't really drink energy drinks. 'cause
Soda's too
it's bad
sweet.
for my sugar, so.
Soda is way too sweet. If I had to drink
Minus
like any
this.
soda, then that would be like sparkling water.
I don't really drink soda unless I'm having like liquor, so I don't drink it. And even that, I mostly just drink tea.
Never had alcohol.
No,
Never had alcohol.
are you 19?
I'm actually 1.5.
Okay, I'm going to start up again. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the works cited assignment. And it also overall was done quite well, with one notable error that, or omission, I guess, that several groups fell into, committed. I'm not sure what the right verb there will be, but so let's take a look at so I just copied and pasted from the document that's online. So works cited assignment, the works cited list. The first stage of the assignment is to find your articles and produce a works cited list. What you're looking for are scholarly articles in which the author or authors discuss, analyze, comment on, or otherwise address some aspect of the issues raised in the course. All of your articles must be from scholarly journals. One student chose an excellent book, but it's a book nonetheless. And so, and a book is not an article. And my concern is, I'm pretty sure the student didn't look at the book. The student found a title and just popped the title in. And had they opened the link that they used, they would have seen that it was a book. And so I'm concerned about how they managed to produce an account of that work, not realizing that it was a book, and yet so that's problematic from a plagiarizing
Pretty
point
good,
of
like
view.
titles were all like books which talked about like nurses who came, like how nurses are migrating to Canada. It was all pretty like good, but all of them were books. Such good titles were all books, so.
Right.
all of them had to be taken.
Yes, I mean, it's a very rich subject. There's an enormous amount of writing going on. And also, it's not as though I think books aren't good. Books are very, very good. There's a certain amount, I mean, I have to draw a line somewhere. And I have difficulty in, overall, it's hard to get students to read articles, let alone read books. And so the idea that students would be responsible to read an entire book seems unwieldy. I'm not going to read the whole book. I'm not going to read all of I'm unlikely to read all of any of the articles that are going to form the basis of your work. It's not impossible, but certainly I'm not, I don't see my job in this case as reading all of those articles. But I do expect each one of you to read at least the article that you pick at this stage, and you're going to have to read parts of many of, if not all of the articles that were picked by your group. But the starting point is I asked for articles and not everybody delivered articles. One of them was a book, another one was an online textbook. So all of the provinces, or not all, many of the provinces in Canada now are encouraging, for all kinds of good reasons and probably for some reasons I'm not so on board with, the making available online resources and so on. But what that resource wasn't was an online article. It was available through the internet, but that doesn't make it a journal article. So there's that. Next. Wait a minute. Shit, I thought. So in addition to produce, so all of your articles must be from scholarly journals. In addition to producing a works cited list, you must briefly describe how the articles are connected to each other and to some specified aspect of the problems, challenges, methods, theories, or case studies dealt with in the course. This will require you to coordinate your efforts from the outset. Now, in part, this is on me. I now realize that my description wasn't as accurate as it could be. 3 of the groups understood what I meant, and 2 of the groups didn't do this the way I had it in mind and the way the other groups did do it. One group didn't do anything like it. They just didn't do this. One group, in the accounts of the works that they gave, some of the students tried to connect the content of their work, I suspect, to the titles of the other articles. What I had in mind, and what the 3 groups who did what I had in mind, was I wanted you to get together and discuss the articles and then briefly give an account, 1 paragraph of, at a high level of abstraction, what it is the articles share and how they could be seen to cooperate in some way, to cooperate in a kind of like to be about related issues to some part of the course content. And so I've looked at all of the works cited lists submitted by each of the groups, but I haven't graded it and I haven't put the comments on. That'll be over the next few days. And so the students who submitted works that don't meet the scholarly article requirement, their grade will reflect that. And moving forward though, that group, or those groups anyway, are going to have to, in addition to doing the rest of the work, they're going to have to go back and find an article so that they can do the next 2 stages. And when I return to you with the grade, I'll return a copy of this work that you submitted with comments, and I'll explain the particulars. For this part, so it goes on to write to say, for this part of the assignment, I expect that each member of the group will read in its entirety at least one of the articles and be able to present to the other members of the group an overview of the article, including how it could relate to the other articles. To accomplish this will involve several meetings. I suppose you could do it in one. And I suspect that some of you didn't have any meetings, that you did all your coordinating sort of, without ever having a meeting. Your articles must be full articles as opposed to book reviews, editorials, or brief notices. And for the first time, that standard was met. The works cited list must follow the MLA style of citations. For help with this, please consult the library webpage. And I included the link, but I didn't reproduce it here. We're going to go to that library, to that page in a second. Now. So I want to take a look at a couple of the sources. So this one I want to take a look at. So this, an article by, I'm not positive how to pronounce that, Esley, I think, Chan, Neoliberalism's Effect on Asian Immigration, a gender-based analysis of systemic inequality in Canadian immigration policy. And that's from the journal Flux International Relations Review. Well, let's go there. And this got full marks, but I just want to call to your attention what this is. Flux International Relations Review is an undergraduate-run academic journal. So it's not a scholarly journal. It's going to count. I'm sure that the information's great. There's no problem from the narrower point of view of meeting the requirements of this course. But I want to call to your attention the way knowledge is generated in the social sciences. Students, this is from McGill University. So especially at elite institutions, like McGill at least aspires to. I think in many ways it's an elite institution, but
I think 8% acceptance rates.
what's that?
We have like 8% acceptance.
Yeah, it's hard to get in, and it's a good university, yeah. But the point is that one of the functions that I've mentioned before about universities is to reproduce knowledge. One of them is to produce knowledge, the other one is to reproduce knowledge. And the way that the produced knowledge gets disseminated for the most part is through specialized journals. So the Journal of Quantum Mechanics and the Journal of International Sociology and this, that, and the other. Those journals are the primary vehicle through which academics disseminate their findings, their questions, their research, and so on to the broader world, largely consisting of other academics and graduate students in that field, but not exclusively. There's a public function that's widely acknowledged, probably massively exaggerated by the participants, but nonetheless, it's an outward-looking feature of the institution and of the particular disciplines that's how they do it. And one of the functions of, so this is from the it's an international relations thing. So I don't know if McGill has a school of international relations, but there is a field, an academic field called international relations. So it might have its home in the political science department at McGill, or there might be a standalone program. Either way, the students who are in that, some students in that program, typically the way this works is it's undergraduate students themselves, usually under the sort of mentorship of a faculty member who organize and who produce an undergraduate journal. And I'm not sure, it might be cynical or even inaccurate to say that it's only purpose, but one of the purposes of a journal like this is to, on the one hand, give to ambitious students the opportunity to practice writing for publication. So people who want to go to law school and people who want to go to graduate school, in addition to getting straight A's, what they'd like to be able to do is to include on their resume that they have a published article, and this counts. And so if the three of us are applying to Harvard Law and students from McGill who are in international relations, the very top students will apply to Harvard Law School. And if we all have the exact same grade point average, and Amanda has a published article and the two of us don't, you stand a better chance of getting in. So that there's a career kind of component to this. It also gives the opportunity to faculty to encourage and sort of mentor students, particularly promising students, and to give them a taste to see if maybe they want to pursue either law school or, in this case, an academic career in international relations. But what is being produced here, the writers of this are going to be students. So only students write in this. Often other undergraduates from other schools will also submit their work to this, and that gives them an opportunity to do the same thing, to get comments back on their research and so on. But this is not an academic journal, but on the face of it, you'd never know. It looks to me, I don't know from websites and so on, but it looks perfectly competent and so on. And but it's one of the ways that knowledge gets produced and reproduced, and it enters into the policy ecology. So policy, not necessarily, not restricted to immigration, but policy in all kinds of different fields is informed by this scholarly infrastructure. And often everything else remaining the same, proponents of a particular policy or opponents of a particular policy will reach into the academic world in order to find support for their policy, the policy position that they want to defend or the policy position they want to challenge. There's an interconnection, an intimate interconnection between the policy producing network of people and the academic network of people who generate this sort of knowledge. And so if we want for students, for people who want to understand how immigration policy works, if you look at the government documents, they themselves often cite scholarly work. Unlikely to be from an undergraduate journal. At those higher levels, they're already socialized into this. They all know about undergraduate journals. And if a reference to this journal entered into that policy production level, everyone would have jokes about it over a beer or a glass of wine later. That would be a big oops. Not because the quality of this work automatically would be wrong or inappropriate or anything like that, but it would just be a goof. It would be an embarrassing oversight in that way. So it's worth considering the sources that you're using. And the stakes here are fine, there's no problem. I'm glad that the students found this article. It looks like it's a perfectly good article and it's not going to be a problem. But I want to call to your attention that these articles come from somewhere, they do multiple things. And so there's that. Now next. So now here, the top part here, this is what the reference was on the assignment, and that does not meet, doesn't conform to the MLA standard. This is what the MLA standard looks like for this same article. Anna Ferrer et al., New Directions, etc. It has the title of the journal, it has the number, it has the year, then the pages. And then this, I forget what this is called. I forget anyway, whatever the hell it's called. It's a URL, but there's a specific name for it in library sciences and so on. And I think that I show you in class how to get this. The library website, for most articles, there's a little button you click and it'll pop it open and you have a bunch of different styles you can use. So you just, pardon? Right, so that's what you need to do. So you need to not do this and what
Some
now what I want
journals
to do
even
is-
have like how to get this work as a citation on the top of their this. Like in any article you go, or at least most of them do this, like right below the download for PDF, they have cite this article, and then you just click on it, there'll be like versions of how the same article cited in different ways.
Exactly. So, and the technology is changing. I mean, so relative to my lifetime, the technology is changing so quickly that the standards themselves are adapting. So when I was an undergraduate, this kind of exercise was required, and then carefully compiling a bibliography, more or less carefully anyway, was part of what you had to do, but there was no internet, so there was MLA already existed, but this didn't. And so this is new. And another component that's largely invisible even to most academics is the extent to which this bibliographic mechanism of knowledge verification and knowledge production is being colonized by global capital. And often, so this right away is, as soon as you click on this, you're entering into the world of pay to play, and you're entering into, by going online, you're maybe unconsciously contributing to the privatization of the public nature of all of this knowledge. The citation requirements increasingly include the mention of the corporations that own and make money off of these journals and so on. And so, and including the publisher's name is the most transparent version of this. MLA, all of the, not all of them, but some of them, the citation style itself is a registered trademark and a corporate property. So none of this is, Mariam, can you type in or turn your mic on and say, what's on the screen now? Is it the PowerPoint?
No, we cannot see anything, just we are watching the class.
Oh, so you don't see a PowerPoint? Okay, so let me.
No.
That's not what I wanted. Great.
There's an X.
Share screen.
Yes, thank you, excellent.
Okay, but of course now I want to share a different screen, so let me see if I can fix that. New share. Now I want to go to this. So is the MLA page on your screen now, Mariam? The library webpage?
Not right now, week 7 presentation.
Okay, so
I think so. Another tab on my Seneca homepage. It must be just yeah, yes. Good.
okay, so now you have Seneca Libraries, MLA citation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me know. Sorry it took me so long to see that. 13 minutes, that's not brilliant. Sorry about that. So on the assignment description, I included a link, and some of this is more central to the practices of certain disciplines and much less central to the practice of other disciplines that a number of our students are part of. So the students in the INS program, there are required courses that they must take, that they do take, that lay out all of this in great detail. And I'm afraid much more competently, I imagine, than I do. However, this is part of citing your work as a central component to the way, to the conventions that guide how the social sciences operate. They also, it's worth noting, they guide how law operates. In almost all of legal writing operates on the basis of citation and quotation, including work that makes its way into courts and so on. And the point the point I'm raising in this connection is that from the point of view of understanding how immigration operates, the changes in the policy, the courts are central institution in that process. And the courts themselves operate using references and checking citations and so on. So the policy world of immigration, migration, refugees, asylum, and so on itself is in part generated by, maintained by, changed through the use of these. And so it's a skill that's required. And the library, if you follow the link, you come to here, and the library, what I think will be most helpful for you is if you go to citation examples and then to journal articles, it'll give you an example of what they're supposed to look like. So now I think that I did this. Yeah, so now I wonder, now I have to go back, new share. This. So is the PowerPoint on the screen for the people out in synchronized land?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So
Thank you.
what this link shows, and I have to close that. What this link shows here at the top is this information. Now, the way to read this is they're describing in order the information that's required, including the punctuation for a proper MLA citation. The author's last name, let me just, I'll read it for you from Ferrer, comma, Anna M. And then if there's more than three or more than two, three or more, instead of listing all the authors, you can write the two Latin words et al, meaning, the rest of them more or less. Then the title of the article in between quotation marks. Then the title of the journal, the volume number, issue number, publication date, and then the DOI link. Right, that's the name of the thing that I couldn't remember, the DOI link. And then it says on Blackboard, note if you are using a PDF version of the article, add the following at the end of your citation. PDF download. Here we're getting into corporate bullshit as far as I'm concerned, so I don't care about this. And anyway, so this is the formatting. This is where to get the formatting information that is a standard part of the mechanism of the dissemination of social scientific information, and more generally, university sanctioned, university legitimated information. It doesn't mean it's true or right or smart. It just describes the social process through which this particular kind of information is disseminated. Plus, and perhaps more importantly, in a narrow way, this is what you have to do. This is the format you have to use. You were asked to use for the works cited, and that you moving forward, if you didn't do it in your works cited list, you will have to in the next two stages of the assignment. Okay, so now. Right, so here's an example of what I was talking about earlier. This is, the title looks like, so out there in synchronous land, do you see a screen that says Canada's immigration history, milestones and stories? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So this, I'm sure, is a perfectly good site. I suspect it's a high school resource, but it might not be. It might be a university resource. That's not the main problem from our point of view. I asked for a scholarly article. This is not a scholarly article. And there's reason for me to doubt that you actually clicked on this link. What it looks to me is that you found this title in some search engine, perhaps even just Google, and didn't take the time or the trouble to double check. And so I hope that wasn't the case. Either way, I've moved on, and we all need to move on. This won't do. This source does not meet the requirements for this assignment. So you need whichever student submitted this, whichever group submitted this, for the next stage, you need to replace this title with a title from an article. Okay, so now. And here's another kind of mistake. This one I'm more familiar with. This happens every year. Taylor and Francis is not the name of the journal article. Taylor and Francis is the name of the multinational corporation that owns the rights or distributes the rights. It's an easily understandable, roughly easily understandable mistake. And it's a mistake that's, for better and for worse, reinforced by the existing technology. Again, 100 years ago, when I was at university, we didn't have, when I was an undergraduate anyway, we didn't have computers. We had to type this. And it was in ways that are unimaginable to you, I think, extraordinarily time consuming, given how few people had any actual typing skills, and given the amount of effort that was required to fix mistakes. Like, it took an insane amount of time. But Taylor and Francis doesn't even look like the name of the journal title, right? The other journal titles are the International Journal of Immigration, and whatever. So this is an error of attention that's made easy and made almost inevitable because it's so easy to cut and paste, to copy and paste, which I encourage you to do. I don't want you to spend one moment of your time on useless effort just for the sake of effort. I don't want you to do anything the hard way just for the sake of doing it the more difficult way. But I do want you to take ownership and responsibility of the work that you're submitting. Do it the smart way, but own it. And so reread your work, and not just look at it again, reread it and see that Taylor and Francis is the same as Taylor and Francis Group, and that should have or could have signaled to you that something's not going right here. What time do we go to? 1:30, right? 1:25. Okay, so we do have plenty of time for me to take to start on the next bit. So what I'll do, I don't remember if I mentioned it before we started back up or not, but I've looked at all the group work, and but I haven't graded it yet, and I haven't written up the comments, and I'll do that over the next couple of days, and I will send it back to the people in the groups, and it'll have my comments, and you'll be in a position to make the mostly minor adjustments like this, replace the title of the journal that this article is from, replace Taylor and Francis in red here with the title of the article. A little bit more complicated, a little bit more work is going to be required to replace that Open Education, whatever that thing was, or the book by Veronica Pogue. It's an excellent book. I encourage you to read it, whoever it was who cited it, but it won't do for our work. You need to go back and find an article, and at the next stage, move forward as though you had originally identified a source that meets the standards or the requirements for the course. Okay, so now, I want to move on to, I want to take a look now at a super interesting article, super interesting to me article, interesting on its own merits, but also interesting because it raises in a way that I hope will be clearer to you than what I'm afraid my own presentation of what I take to be the same was not as clear. So I want to point out this sentence. I pulled this sentence out of this article. It's a chapter actually from the Routledge Handbook on Crime and International Migration. And our library doesn't have it. I'm going to ask them to get it, but that doesn't always happen. But for our, it doesn't matter. I have it now. So the sentence that I think best captures the point that I've been trying to articulate, to identify as what's missing from Trebilcock and Kelly is captured right here. Building on the Canadian case, this chapter asks, how can we make sense of these paradoxical tendencies that simultaneously promote the inclusion and exclusion of migrants? And the author of the book, of the chapter, Karine Côté-Boucher, whose work I'm not familiar with at all until this morning when I started reading this, I'm going to have to read more of her work to be sure that she has in mind what I have in mind, but whether she does or not, what she says captures what I have in mind and the problem I want to call to your attention. The paradoxical tendencies that she's talking about, let's take a look at it a little bit more. So she writes earlier in the chapter, from the quote I just pulled out, the securing of Canada's borders cannot be seen as purely exclusionary. Other more subtle dynamics are at play. These concern a particular social imaginary where the criminalization of migration intersects with neoliberal politics to form the Canadian bordering regime. Now, bordering is meant to, well, let's skip what bordering means. It's a complicated way, or it's meant to indicate a complicated thing that we don't need to understand right now. For our purposes, what I want to call to your attention is that the way it connects to the problem I see with Trebilcock and Kelly's account is that they did not come up with, and I don't think they looked for, a way to identify and discuss the nature of the coexistence of these contradictory impulses in Canadian immigration history. They remained satisfied by pointing out that big business wanted one thing, low wages, and workers wanted another thing, high wages. And they argue, or they mostly describe, they don't argue all that much. They don't develop much of an analysis. They're mostly interested in, or at least they devote most of the effort to just describing the stages. And their description is, well, when immigration levels go down, labor won to the degree that it protects wages. And when immigration levels go up, big business interests won, and that's the end of it. Whereas what Côté Boucher, or whatever, I'm going to get her name, Côté Boucher calls to our attention is that there's a dynamic going on, and she calls it a paradox, I think contradiction. Thinking of it as a contradiction, it makes it easier to integrate her analysis with the scholarly literature that I'm most familiar with, the Marxist critical thinking sociological literature focuses some of its attention on the persistence of contradictions in modern society and the ways that contradictions continue to structure an inherently unstable way of organizing human society. But whether you call it a paradox or a contradiction, the point that she raises that I want to continue to explore with you is the coexistence of these two opposing forces. She writes a little bit later, complex dynamics of hostility and openness, of repulsion and desire are unfolding at this intersection. We saw earlier, one of the statistics we looked at was that in the last 5 years or so, the number of, maybe it's almost 10 years now, but the ratio of permanent to temporary migrants to Canada has flipped in the last little while. And even with the temporary workers, the Canadian policy account, the proponents of these policies and the opponents, many of the opponents of these policies are seemingly constrained to adopt the initial position as described by the government that distinguishes between good temporary migrants or good temporary migrants, good labor migrants who are permanent residents. So if you have a PhD in chemical engineering and you want to migrate to Canada, you can qualify for a permanent residency right away. If you're an apple picker, you're never going to qualify. Never is too strong. You're much more likely to qualify for only a temporary permit. So the way labor enters into migration policy is itself divided between two kinds of things. And the justification for the temporary the temporariness of the temporary classification is justified in these contradictory ways. We're open to PhDs in chemical engineering, and we're worried about temporary workers. We're worried that for some reason they're more likely to be criminals, and we're worried that for some reason they're more likely to be welfare mooches. When we look at, and we will look a little bit at, the accounts that are given of this in the popular press, and also we look at how the government has used popular press accounts to push one side or the other of these paradoxes, we see, at least according to Boucher-Côté, I think it's clear, and also according to Harold Bowder, whose work I already was familiar with and was already on the reading list, we'll see that how this complex dynamic, how accurate it is to think of it as a complex dynamic. And it's the forces that underwrite the complexity of that dynamic, the forces that are analyzed separately or even just described separately by Trebilcock and Kelly, that I want to offer to you a way of understanding in a little bit more of an interactive way. So now let me just make sure here. Right. So a little bit later, she writes, the task of differentiating bad from good migrants, law-abiding from dangerous, productive from indolent, citizen material from temporary labor source, represents an important legitimating function for Canadian border policing and immigration authorities. And it's this legitimating function that I want to call to your attention. And it's this component that's missing completely from Trebilcock and Kelly, and even Bowder, it doesn't seem to me really drills into that. It's not just with respect to supporting or justifying immigration policy. The analysis I'm going to articulate, and in articulating it, I guess, defend it for your consideration, is that it's not only about migrants that this legitimating discourse exists. It's not just about apple pickers who come from Nicaragua and Jamaica, and it's not just about chemical engineers who come from India with their relevant and relevantly different skills that are at stake, and the contribution that they can and will and do make to Canadian society. It's also the underlying structure of Canadian society as it currently exists in a global world. By the way that the way that the government justifies extending permanent residency to certain groups and certain kinds of work, certain kinds of workers, and the way that they at least implicitly allow, and I think in some clear cases, actively engage in, if not the demonizing, then at least the undermining of the equal standing. So let me take a step back. Canada presents itself, and in many, many ways believes, and in many ways I think legitimately believes itself to be a country based on human rights. And the fundamental notion of human rights is that all humans are, from a rights point of view, equal. We're all the same from a rights point of view. Citizenship enters into that problematically, as was discussed in the first chapter, because in Canada, some humans with Canadian citizenship, enjoy the legal protection of those rights in a way that's different from the way other humans who happen to be in Canada but have a different status enjoy those rights, namely non-Canadian citizens. The state interacts with non-citizens in a way that's different from the way they interact with citizens, and that's justified, at least in part, by their citizenship status. There's an opening potential inconsistency. I think that it's in fact a contradiction, but it's at least potentially an inconsistency. And so moving forward, how does that inconsistency map its way on? How does the government justify this? The government justifies this in a couple of recognizable ways that often there's no problem, that the rest of how society operates continues to operate just fine. But under global pressures and under local or provincial or national pressures, sometimes adjustments have to be made. And so how those adjustments get made and the tolerance for contradiction among those is the work that's done by this political legitimating. They need to explain away, they need to get us to ignore or miss or be blind to some of these contradictions. And that's the hegemonic function that was being described in that article we briefly looked at last week and the week before. The government, so that the bordering services are the kind of coercive arm, coercive component of the hegemonic power of the state. Canada Border Services in 2003, largely in response to 9/11, but part of a larger global trend that had started before 9/11, and 9/11 is no longer really on anybody's radar, but all of these things keep manifesting themselves. But before that change in 2003, Border Service personnel didn't have any weapons. Now they do. They didn't have any arresting authority. Now they do. The Canadian Border Services, Canada Immigration Services, which is what border used to be the only game in town, they didn't have any judicial authority. Canada Border Patrol now can arrest and so on. So there's a coercive component that takes care of some of the contradiction. There's also, though, an effort at the other form of hegemony, ideological. Canada presents itself as a welcoming place. And how do we know we're welcoming? because we accepted refugees from Syria. We didn't accept refugees from other places. That was a separate consideration. We don't accept all refugees. We don't accept anybody who, we don't accept all refugees. We accept a lot of refugees. We accept more refugees than many other countries do, but we don't accept them all. We have to draw, we draw a line somewhere, and how and where we draw that line is in part carried out through coercion and in part carried out through ideological means, through what is described earlier as the social imaginary. So we build up this image of who we are. Canada is this just country, and we want and it's partly in order to produce a particular version of that social imaginary that the Canadian government expends some effort at having recently arrived migrants feel welcomed by the state, by society, by individual Canadians. And some of the policies that are implemented is to provide an objective institutional mechanism through which, for excellent reasons, and I think largely in good faith, through which that subjective response will be produced and realized. So at Seneca College, we have an office for international students where there's people who are full-time employees whose job it is to answer questions for international students, to organize events for international students. And I absolutely don't believe, I'm not making the claim that this is just a cynical component designed exclusively to extract more tuition money from international students. The college will operate better if all of our students felt welcome here. Some of our students have a recognizably different kind of life experience. And so we want to, understandably enough, and to the extent that we're successful, it's good. And we're always trying to think through ways we can do it better. We want to change some of the ways Seneca does what Seneca does so that international students will feel more welcome. On the other hand, there is no other hand. We do that, and that's one of the ways that this happens. We want to make it easier. We don't want to make it so easy, though, that we're prepared to charge the same amount of tuition. So there's a constraining factor, but that is the sort of opening position that we're not, right under these circumstances anyway, the provincial government is not going to move, I don't think, on that. If you're prepared to pay double, triple the tuition, and you meet all the other standards that are required for admission to Seneca, then you're going to be, then you can be part of that community. And we do want you, we Seneca as an institution, want you to feel welcome here. Not just to say you feel welcome, we want you to feel welcome. But there's a limit to how far that goes, and it's the nature of that limit that I want to explore. It's a fuzzy limit, it's not clear. Okay, now. Right, and so she quotes the work of a couple of other scholars, Ms. Adra, whose work I do know, and Nielsen, whose work I don't know, but she writes in her a few pages later, through legislations, bureaucratic institutions, and policing practices, migration receiving, here she's quoting them, but anyway, migration receiving countries sustain what Ms. Adra and Nielsen term differential inclusion. So the chemical engineer who comes with a PhD from India or wherever this engineer comes from with this high value added, high tech skill is going to be welcome as a permanent resident, and efforts are going to be made by the government, but also by the employer who's looking to take advantage of her or his work they're going to try to find a job for that person's spouse. They're going to help them try to find a place to live and so on. Different kinds of effort, different kinds of inclusion are going to be extended to differentially positioned migrants to Canada. And the primary way that that generates a contradiction is in this self-image of Canada as being organized on the basis of this notion of equal rights for everyone. So this term differential inclusion as an opening understanding, and it captures the reality that we saw described by the stages through which immigration law changed from 1867 up until the 1970s. That differential inclusion, a harsher, but I think much more accurate word would be white supremacist. The white supremacist policy that was explicitly endorsed by the Canadian government, widely supported by Canadian population, over and over and over, reasserted by political parties across the relatively narrow range of political spectrum that's represented in Parliament. Nonetheless, all of that, it was one version of differential inclusion that in some ways to our contemporary consciousness, the most shocking, the least acceptable aspect of differential inclusion that characterizes Canadian immigration history from a 2023 point of view is this almost unimaginably transparent commitment to a white supremacist understanding of Canada and a white supremacist understanding of Canadian citizenship. That's disappeared. There are no serious people who publicly can endorse that and maintain standing in the world of public under the current configuration. I think it's the job of responsible academics to point out that that can change very quickly. It's changed in other places, mostly over the course of human history. That particular madness has changed in the better direction, away from those sorts of monstrous categorizing, but it's not exclusively changed for the better. In the United States, in Hungary, in Germany, in France, in England, to a less transparent degree in Canada also, there's been some backsliding on the commitment to a real living up to the multicultural goal that Canadian governments have claimed to and have made some level of good faith effort to implement to Canada. Now, the motivation for it, I think, can be questioned, but the commitment to it, I think, is sincere if motivated by conflicting reasons. So this notion of differential inclusion is at odds with or exists in tension with the broader notion of equality that is widely believed to characterize Canada's self-understanding of itself. So the desire, she goes on to write, the desire for perfect immigrants, chosen for their qualifications for being prosperous, active, family-oriented, respectful of authority, and grateful for having been granted access to a democratic and wealthy society, enters in tension with representations of undeserving fraudulent refugees knocking at the door, of migrants who refuse to be like us and dare to make political demands, of suspected terrorists and criminals who should be sent back to where they came from. And she quotes Bonnie Honig, who's a social scientist, philosopher, from the States, I think she was at Harvard, but in any event, who describes this broader, this duality here that's, I think, very well captured in this sentence as a xenophobic, xenophobic dynamic. Xeno is the Greek for other, stranger. And xenophilic is soliciting this other, open to, philic means love, philia is one of the Greek words for love. So other loving, and phobic is fear in a way that's problematically but connected to hatred. So there's loving and hating the other, and that dynamic, that dynamic captures in a strong way I think in a way that suits the theoretical view that I find most persuasive, better than thinking of it as a paradox. The xenophilic, xenophobic contrast captures that contradictory nature rather than paradoxical nature. Paradox, yeah.
She summed up the entire second discussion board in one paragraph.
Yeah.
I think.
She kind of,
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The Chinese migrants from Hong Kong versus the socialist students from Kenya. Exactly, right. Good catch. I agree. And part of the point I want to make is that this dynamic continues to exist partly because it fulfills other functional roles in the role in the ongoing existence of Canadian society and the global world. So that this Canada is doing this in a globalized and continuingly globalizing dynamic. It's a global thing, and Canada's response is at least partly constrained by this. And so if we look at some of the other things that Canada does to demonstrate that global embeddedness, if we compare our response to what's going on in Haiti to our response to what's going on in Ukraine, or we compare our response to what's going on in Yemen to what's going on in Ukraine, we find a very big difference. In Yemen, the bad guy is the United States, so we've got to be careful. In Ukraine, the bad guy is Russia, so we can go all in. In Haiti, the suffering is super, super important, so we've really got to do something, so we're going to spend $10 million. In Ukraine, the suffering is equally bad, super important, so we're going to spend $1 billion. There's differential responses there that aren't consistent with the component of the justification for those actions that include, that's organized on the basis of our commitment to values. Yesterday, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, in case you didn't know, but Joe Biden was in Poland and he gave a speech where he insists that the United States is engaged in this military action on Ukraine's behalf because they're defending democracy. And that can't be the only reason. He didn't say that it's the only reason, but it's the only reason he offered. The United States engages in, supports anti-democratic regimes all around the world, over and over and over. The United States is actively funded, sometimes publicly, often secretly funded, the overthrowing of democratically elected governments many, many, many times. Russia illegally invaded the Ukraine. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. What I'm saying is that there's a gap between the justification Canada has for pursuing certain policies when they're described as being value-driven. There's other things going on as well, and sometimes those other things override our values. In some contexts, but not in other contexts, those values that we cite as the motivation for a particular policy. So when we recently announced that we're going to buy $500 million worth of rockets from the United States and give them to Ukraine. That's $500 million that we could have spent on something else. You know, maybe it's over 10 years and I'm not clear. I've been trying to figure out if we're selling them to Ukraine or if we're giving them to Ukraine. Either way, we're spending that money now. And if we're selling it, then maybe we'll get that money back later, but it's left, I think, on purpose, very vague. But that 500 million that we're spending, whether we're lending it, I mean, or just giving it, is money we need to explain. Why are we spending it there rather than giving us all back money on our taxes? Some people would like that. Or having tuition-free post-secondary education. Lots of people think that's a good idea. Not enough people to make it happen, but lots of people think that's a good idea. Or spend more money on women's soccer. I don't know if that's such a great idea. I mean, not that I have anything against women's soccer, but spending money on international sports seems crazy to me when there's kids who don't have breakfast today. It seems to me that that might be a better place to start. We'd even get more soccer players that way. But so the point is that these policy decisions interact with these contradictory dynamics. And the scholarly literature that we'll be looking at in the second half of the course attempts to make some connections between how these contradictions, how the persistent existence of these contradictions in the field of migration reflect broader social patterns in Canada and broader global patterns. And so she later on elsewhere in the article writes, but in addition to event-specific responses to mediatized immigration cases, so the next reading, the other author whose work we're going to take a careful look at is Harold Bowder, and his area, as I've explained before, his area of interest is, he teaches in the geography department, but migration and immigration is his specialty. And he looks at, and he has compared how German media and Canadian media over the years have responded to and generated responses to changing patterns of migration, labor migration, asylum seekers, irregular migration, all of this. And so that the role of media in shaping and responding to and producing what in one of the earlier slides, Cote Boucher referred to as the social imaginary, how that enters into the equation. So we get, in addition to event-specific responses to mediatized immigration cases, that means they made the news. That's what mediatized means in this context. Persistent immigration restrictions in countries built on immigration must be supported by a sustained program of political legitimation. And we'll take a look a little bit at how the relationship between government policy more generally, on the one hand around wages and on the other hand, other sorts of considerations, it changes. So right now, separately from the migration thing, in Canada, in the United States, and I think in Europe, but I'm not really sure, but in Canada and the United States, since near the beginning of the end of the COVID pandemic, inflation has been in the news. The cost of living has gone up dramatically in Canada. The way it's measured for these purposes has gone up dramatically. And one of the responses has been, and it sneaks out from the official announcements every once in a while, but in addition to increasing interest rates, what the government and the government economists, the government policymakers, who are the official spokespeople of the government position, every once in a while it sneaks out that what they really want to do is make sure wages don't go up. Wages have to stay low in order to, allegedly, in order to tame inflation. And that's insane. It's crazy to everybody who earns a wage that we need to, that it's our wages that have to pay, that are paying anyway. I mean, I'm putting the gas in my car, you know, like everybody else, except the top 1%. And so there's this contradiction between, or there are gaps and paradoxes, let's say, to use our vocabulary earlier, in that are arguably, I'll make the argument, are reflected by similar things. Between the split between low-wage workers are somehow the threat to us, whereas high-wage workers are a manifestation of multicultural Canada's shining example. And so we are superheroes for allowing people who want to come here, as long as they have a certain set of skills, as long as they offer a certain kind of thing to Canadian society, then what we really like about them is this multicultural thing. Whereas we'll tolerate those temporary, we'll only tolerate, we welcome the high skilled workers, and we tolerate the allegedly low skilled workers, the low wage workers. And so understood in a certain way, there's a contradiction there. There's other ways of understanding it that characterize it in just as a market question. It's there's a resource allocation situation. It's not like we're kidnapping people in Jamaica to come and pick apples, and kidnapping people in Germany or Sri Lanka or wherever to come and be surgeons at Toronto General. We post a job opening and we take a look, and the people with the surgery degree, we take a look at them, and if we can't find any close by, then we'll take some further away. And everybody waiting for an operation, nearly everybody waiting for an operation, is thrilled to bits that we're getting surgeons wherever they're from, as long as they're doing their job right. And if they make 300 grand a year, almost everybody's cool with that, right? I can't even imagine what it would be like to get to become a surgeon, never mind to actually do that work. So, thank goodness they're doing that. I don't disagree. Yeah, Amanda?
Bowder's dialectic, the chapter that was posted, he had mentioned that he or they that the multiculturalism of Canada was like a downside, because it was kind of more of a front than anything, like that it's contributing to the divide. Do you agree with that? Because Canada likes to promote, we all see it, like diversity, multiculturalism, and then you see the startling reality of temp workers, immigration. Do you agree with Bowder's approach on that?
Yes.
Okay.
I agree that it's a front, but I don't think it's just a front.
No.
I think that I think it's comparable to greenwashing. Do you know what greenwashing is? Do you know what greenwashing is? Greenwashing is policies that corporations put forward, and they describe them as though one version of it is they describe it as though it's motivated by exclusively motivated by a concern to be as part of the solution for climate change, but in fact, it's really only another way to make a buck.
So every company during Pride Month is greenwashing.
Well, kind of. They call that rainbow washing.
What's that?
Rainbow washing, which is like.
Yeah, exactly. Rainbow washing is another version of it. So that, yes, we're all about inclusion and diversion and all this. And a lot of the equity, diversion, and inclusion policies are criticized for being window dressing, only window dressing. And the sharpest version of that critique is that by engaging in window dressing, what you're doing is you're hiding the ongoing reality of the underlying problem, and you're making it seem like things are getting better when they're not getting better. And I think that's Bowder's main point.
He also brought up that we identify belonging and like we identify as an immigrant or as belonging as, we don't identify as that. Like I'm Canadian, not German. I'm from Markham, not Toronto, right? Like it's very much about the otherness, I
Yeah.
suppose, or like the othering.
Yeah. Yes.
So like, yeah, it's, I was just thinking, because you mentioned, so, I don't know, it's a very weird concept of like, not just greenwashing, I'm used to that. don't get me wrong.
Right.
It's just, it's a very jarring concept.
Well, and I'll get to you in a second. But one of the ways that multiculturalism fits in that is that you two are multicultural, but I'm just normal. Is the way that a lot of the way multiculturalism operates is that the existing, the perceived existing standard is not part of multiculturalism. There's no, Irish folk dancing is not part of multiculturalism, it's just part of history. Whereas other sorts of things are. And as soon as you see that contradiction, it reveals the problematic nature of the whole concept. You had a question or a comment?
No, I was thinking like when you said about the surgeon who is being imported from other countries, wouldn't it be like at least financially easier for them to feel a sense of belonging than the low wage, low skill apple picker from let's say Jamaica, whereas the brain surgeon from Germany who comes feels a higher sense of like belonging, at least financially, because he's getting paid 300 grand a month or a year or whatever, rather than the $15 minimum wage apple picker, because the sense of belonging they both feel is very different. And to like understand like truly how to feel a sense of belonging, I think the apple picker should have more of a say, because he's experiencing literally from the government, from his employer, from his job, the instability of his job more than the brain surgeon.
Absolutely.
I agree with you completely, but the government is never gonna see it that way, right? But like, I could move to like Spain, right? I could go work as a neurosurgeon. I don't know how I'm gonna do that, but like, let's say.
Yeah.
If I don't speak the language, if I don't have family there, you know, like belonging seems easy on paper, right? You get a good job, but like, then you're an immigrant as well, right? So like, I'm talking out of my ass right now. I don't know. I was born here. But like, I feel like belonging and like kind of the multiculturalism of Canada is like just so much more complicated than,
Right.
oh, well,
It's not very
Yes, I think that's crucial. It's so much more complicated. When the first year I taught this course, I was really surprised, and because what I'm about to describe has repeated itself, so I'm no longer surprised, but I continue to notice it, is that initially I organized the course around as strong a version of what you were describing, Bowder's views as what you were describing, and several of the international students wouldn't buy it. They came here and they insisted that it's great here, that it's better here than where they were from, and that they've never faced any racism, not once in the 3 months, 6 years, 11 years they've lived here. And so that I still think that it's, I insist that it's complicated. I persist in believing that it's complicated, and I'm not so arrogant always anyway, to just dismiss the views of the very people who, you know, I'm not deluded enough to think that I understand better what it's like to be an immigrant here than people who actually were born somewhere and lived here. So that some of what multiculturalism is supposed to be about is at the very least having some of the effects that it was claimed to be intended to produce, and that it insists it is successful in producing. So it's not nothing, and it's not absolutely a failure, and it's not exclusively an excuse. The way the kind of ancestor, the earliest version of greenwashing, one component of greenwashing was when oil companies or cigarette companies insisted that smoking doesn't cause cancer. And so they put all kinds of effort in, all kinds of public relations efforts, all kinds of other strategies to protect their market. And when that didn't work, eventually they tried other strategies, and but the oil companies have reproduced all of those things. And there's an ad on TV from, again, I forget the name of the organization, but what they're talking about, so they represent oil sands producers. So do you know what the oil sands are? It's in Alberta, there's a large, huge area, like, thousands and thousands of square kilometers, where there are oil deposits. But the oil is not, instead of being in between rocks, it's in sand of some kind. And it's a kind of oil that costs a lot more money to extract in a usable form. And it requires a lot more processing to extract the oil from all the other minerals. So it's dirty oil. And this organization that represents the producers of this oil are engaging in this strategy that's a bit similar to what the cigarette companies were doing. We're trying to be better, and we've got the science. The first move that cigarette companies made was filters. They put filters on their cigarettes. I think they probably existed before there was a cancer problem, but initially, one of the things that they had fancy filters that were supposed to filter out some of the harmful effects of cigarettes, but they knew that they weren't doing that at all, and that it was just to make sure that people bought as many cigarettes before they died of cancer, and that as many new kids started smoking, and so that they would trick them into not being afraid of getting cancer from smoking. And some people believe, anyway, I do, that by and large, the oil sands right now, they claim, and I'm sure they are spending some money on getting scientists to try to scrub the oil cleaner, but nobody believes that it'll be done anywhere near fast enough to be able to address the underlying environmental problems. And the analogy I'm trying to draw is that multicultural strategies, at least so far, have not succeeded in eliminating some of the underlying white supremacist dynamics that continue to characterize Canadian society.
It varies from experience to experience. Like some immigrants might have experienced no like racism or like their like needs and preferences being on the back pedal, but some of them might have experienced this, and then there's no way to say that your experience is right, your experience is wrong. It's everybody.
Well, there might be. Social scientists think there is, so that if you and I both had the same qualifications, same job, same salary, and we both applied for an apartment, you wouldn't know that I applied. I wouldn't know that you applied. I get the apartment because my last name sounds white, and you don't get the apartment because your last name doesn't sound white. You would never know unless you looked into it, or you wouldn't know solely from the fact, because it's hard to get an apartment now, right? So lots of people get turned down for all kinds of different reasons, and you would never, you might easily not ever find out that that's what happened, but it did. And so social science claims to be able to, at least under certain circumstances, and at least to some degree, establish objective patterns that more accurately reflect the underlying reality than the subjective impressions of the people engaged in that reality. It doesn't always meet that standard. There are methodological challenges to be faced. Certainly, it's true that the people experience things differently, and social scientific attempts to explain that away are doomed to failure. They're I mean, why would you want to do that? But just what the social scientists often are trying to do is to connect the subjective to the objective in ways that give a better understanding of the phenomenon. Okay, so right, so The last point I wanted to make is this, that the political legitimation includes interventions in the imaginary, that is the public relations dimensions of Canadian life. And what Bowder looks at in particular is the way news media construct and reconstruct and adapt to and respond to, and on the other hand, how policy is shaped in accordance with some of the media responses. That's one component of this social imaginary that shapes Canadian consciousness. And I wanted to end on this notion of consciousness because and it's connected directly to what you were saying, this sense that you belong. In order for it, it's almost necessarily a consciousness generated thing. If you don't feel like you belong, there's a sense in which you can't be mistaken about that. If you feel like you don't belong, the rest of us could insist all day, no, you belong. And that's not always going to make it feel like you belong. One thing though, is that some people, many people, only notice after a while that they belong. And one of the typical trajectories of this, and my father went through this in his own little way, and lots of other people, is it's when my father migrated to Canada. He moved from Belgium to Canada. And then when he went back to Belgium, he finally, he told me this, and this is a typical migration story. It was only when he went back to Belgium that he realized he felt like he belonged in Quebec. And a couple of people mentioned things like that in the chat, not the chat, in the discussion board, and that comes up regularly. Now, the thing is, that's a story that is available already. So that doesn't mean it's not true, that doesn't mean it's not genuine, but it does, we do know that stories can pre-shape for us our expectations. And that's just the way, arguably, at least I believe this, that's one of the ways that our consciousness is structured. It's partly structured narratively. And so if there's a narrative that we can attach our experiences to, sometimes those narratives provide for us an explanatory framework that makes it easier for us to integrate a bunch of different components of that experience into one thing. More or less into one thing. Okay, so that was all I have for today. Next week, we will not meet because it's the reading break. And then the week after, we will start with Bowder and the immigration dialectic. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good break. Okay, so that's it for today. Goodbye.